for Chicago, we'd like to welcome you to Dialogue, our series of panel discussions, conversations, and provocative artistic discourse presented in partnership with the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. My name is Stephanie Cristello. I'm the programming manager here at EXPO. I'm also the editor-in-chief of Possati, Chicago's International Journal of Contemporary and Modern Art, and we are thrilled to welcome you to today's program. The Dialogues program will be running continuously over the next 3 days, and so we hope that this is one of the many discussions that you'll be able to attend. Before I introduce today's panel, which I'll also be moderating, I'd like to introduce you to Marco Graziosi, Deputy Consul of the Italian Consulate in Chicago, who will say a few words, and thanks to his offices, have made this event generously possible. Please help me in welcoming Marco.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you. Good afternoon, buon pomeriggio. Welcome to our friends from Italy. On behalf of the Consul General of Italy and the Italian institutions and the Cultural Institute, I'd really like to welcome today's panel, and I would like to thank EXPO Chicago. Our Italian Institute of Culture has been having this fruitful collaboration with EXPO Chicago over the last couple of years. So it's a great honor for us as Italian institutions to join forces again, and today with this inaugural presentation of this panel, just renew our valuable partnership in 2015. I'm very also pleased that we have such prominent voices here today from Italy, and they will tell us, and they will offer us their ideas, and they will let us know what's happening in Italy as far as the contemporary art scene is concerned. So I welcome you, Director Letizia Ragaglia, ladies first, our artist Diego Perrone, and Mr. Alessandro Possati. Thank you. We are very honored and pleased to have you here. And we also thank you from the Italian institutions because thanks to your talent and your endeavors in this realm, our country is also appreciated as far as contemporary art is concerned. Because I do believe that I'm not mistaken if I say that when you mention contemporary art in Italy, this is not really the first association we think of. I mean, Italy it's got such a profound and rich artistic heritage that contemporary art is not the first thing that comes to your mind when you think about country. But I can guarantee you for a fact that indeed the contemporary art scene in Italy is buzzing with new artists, new talents who are being rapidly, whose works have been rapidly achieving acclaimed recognitions, I mean, locally and internationally. And then there is also public success as far as the Italian audience is concerned. In fact, I think the latest artists, the latest generation of contemporary artists, as your present Diego here shows, are opening up to the world, and they are embracing, thanks to also a close relationship with the curators and collectors and museums. They are really showing to the world what they are capable of doing. So such vivacity in this field of contemporary art in Italy is also tangible when you look at what's happening in Italy, for instance, when it comes to these new museums. We have here today a director of a very important MUSEION, Museum of Contemporary Art in Bolzano, in the northern part of Italy. And but I'm also thinking about the Maxi Museum in Rome. So we are witnessing the birth and the evolution of new museums of contemporary art in Italy, which is a testimony to the interest that this contemporary art has in Italy. It's also, I think, refreshing to think that contemporary art is gaining public attention in Italy, because they certainly bring a new, much needed, fresh, critical approach in the way they tackle issues, social, political issues, or the way they revisit our past, or they interpret our present, and they certainly do this resorting to a constant crossover of different artistic languages, and it's this use of different installations, methodologies, materials, techniques that provokes the audience and stimulates also thoughts and discussions, which is something which I believe it's paramount, it's essential not only for art but for each society. So we're very pleased that you will talk about a little bit about a different aspect of Italy today to this audience, and I welcome you again, and I'm pleased that you're here. And I really will hope to see you soon again in Chicago, on this part of the country that is sometimes unjustly overlooked by our international friends. And indeed, let me tell you, I've been working here 2 years for the Italian consulate. It's an unbelievable hub, economical hub, but also artistic hub, intellectual hub. So I really strongly encourage you to consider Chicago and Midwest for your future activities. Thank you very much.
So much, Marco, for that very kind introduction. I know that you covered quite a bit about the panelists, so I'll skip some of the introductions on that end, but I will start with the beginning of this panel. And the concept really started in December of last year, after a meeting that we had with your colleague, Andrea Raus, at the Italian Cultural Institute. And it's thanks to his organization, all of the colleagues that you have, and their generosity that we're able to host these 3 speakers here today. So, this is really the first panel that is considering international exhibitions in a European context, specifically from Italy in the United States in recent years. And so I wanted to start with that, with the idea of Italy as a nation. And the goal, of course, is to come to some sort of definition, or hear your thoughts on a definition of what contemporary art in Italy is today. So within that vein, what's the concept of a nation in your perspective in this globalized world? What is Italy and contemporary art to you? I think maybe we'll start with Alessandro or Letizia from an institutional standpoint. So far. Yeah.
Should I start?
Yes.
So thank you very much also for this kind invitation. I'm very happy to be here. I'm director of the museum, which is in the border with Austria, but at the same time I'm also vice president of Association of the Italian Museums of Contemporary Art, called AMACI, Associazione di Musei d'Arte Contemporanea Italiani. And as Marco said, it's true, you always connect Italy with our glorious past, and therefore it's an important aim also to tell people, especially abroad, what important artists we have. Diego had also shown in our museum. But effectively preparing for this panel, I realized that it's true, we have a very special scene, but that effectively this past is very often present also in the recent generation. It can be formally, that there is always a research of an aesthetical form. It can also be that recent past gives also start to works. We had an artist like Rossella Biscotto recently in our museum, and she discovered statues of Benito Mussolini and Vittorio Emanuele in the Euro in Rome, and she worked on them. So you can't summarize what is contemporary art, but for me contemporary art in Italy now is to say, yes, we are a country with a lot of historical richness, but the new scene, contemporary artists can make this past also alive. And I don't think, because sometimes we have also some fear in front of this contemporary art. So no, there is also kind of conservatorism. And I strongly believe that through also the eyes of this younger generation, some issues of our past can be really alive. I also, and then I stop invite people to go to the video program. There is an amazing video by young artist Julian Karani, and this video was made in a marble cave. So it's a completely very beautiful contemporary video, but it's also about something, Carrara marble, that people talk about.
Something very classical, I think, too, which a point that you're touching on is the relationship between contemporary art in Italy, particularly to history and classicism. And I'm wondering, Alessandro, maybe too, for you, what your relationship is working with artists coming from more of a project space that's more of a roving platform, not necessarily, you know, a historical institution, but some artists that you've worked with their relationship to history and contemporary art's relationship to history in a city such as Venice.
Well, let me introduce myself. I'm Alessandro Possati. I've started the Zuecca project space, which is a non-for-profit cultural association based in Venice. We develop a programming around the art biennale, primarily. So in an art biennale context where the stakes are very high and the qualitative level of international artists being presented is very high, we're challenged constantly to engage in a dialogue with a very ancient city, which is charged and loaded with traditional historical art masterpieces everywhere, and bring contemporary, or the most contemporary view possible to view for the world to see. So in that respect, it's an ongoing challenge, and we're faced with Italy's overpowering history and how to contemporize it and contextualize it today. A recent project that I developed with a young Italian artist from the Veneto region. He's a sound artist, and he set out to record the sound of empty theaters in Italy. The most historical theaters such as La Scala and La Fenice. He gained access to them and recorded the empty sound of the space. So again, sound art, which is probably to the forefront of contemporary art, being almost immaterial in its form, and yet engaging a dialogue with these traditional houses of music, which are such a big part of Italian cultural heritage and history. So that's an example of of how a young Italian artist we work with deals with this heritage, and
it seems like they're interacting with a history which is not just an art history; it's a cultural history. You know, it's, as you say, you talked about this before. It spans literature, it spans music. But Diego, I'm also really interested from an artist's perspective. You work with many classical forms in your contemporary work. And so I'm interested in what sort of concepts you're borrowing from within that history, especially as it relates to your international exhibitions, where the Italian history is not necessarily the context, but certainly a source in your work.
Yes, see, I work a lot with tradition and especially also with the icon, Italian icon, and especially, in fact, my solo show at Casey Kaplan in 2013 was about that, and because the show was composed only of two different pieces. One was a series of painting on PVC, on black PVC, it's a sort of sheet of plastic, and the other one is a sculpture of a huge shell in a sort of strange suspension, because only one point touching the ground and the other point, the large one, was hanging hanging on the ceiling with a rope, with a tiny rope. And so the painting face was a copy of a sculpture made by Adolfo Wild in the beginning of the 20th century. And Adolfo Vilti is himself in Italian culture, of course, an icon because he was teacher also of Lucio Fontana, many famous artists like Arturo Martini and Fausto Melotti, etc. And so what I do, basically what I done is go in the museum where this sculpture was exposed and photograph it in a low resolution with my smartphone as a tourist can do. And I try to copy as real as possible, also if the photo was overexposed or full of reflex, etc. And then when I install everything on the wall, all these faces was looking like laughing at the other sculpture in front of the. So the space was quite strange, ironic, but in the same time, yeah, ironic and also quite scary. But to come back to your question, I think my relation between contemporary art and historical work. I think that I use Adolfo Vilta and his sculpture as an instrument, as a tool. And I think it's not so forced to say that I use Adolfo Vilta as Paul McCarthy used ketchup of his own work to discover the American imaginary, or Jim Shaw about religion with illustration. And no.
That's very true. I really like this notion of using cultural heritage as a formal material, a formal device.
Yeah.
And I think, jumping off from that, beyond the references to cultural heritage, what are some of the risks that you all deal with this presence of history in Italy? I know, we said that it can be overwhelming at times, or perhaps subsume some of the contemporary work that's on view. How do you navigate, from an exhibition perspective, when you're creating an exhibition or when you're curating one, this relationship between history and contemporary art? Maybe we start with you. I'm looking at you, yeah.
I wouldn't talk about a risk. I would really talk in inverse terms and say it is a richness, and it is also a big challenge. And Italy has never been, let's say, united. That's now a little bit of provocation. We have so many regions, and every region has different characteristics. And now, when everybody is talking about globalization, the fact that we have so many different regions, so different cultural heritages which have a big importance in Italy, can make the difference. Because artists are rediscovering our traditions and bringing them to the public. And in a moment we say where things seem so similar, sometimes in the art world, to have artists who rediscover the traditions and the differences can be really also a richness for the future. And we also see that maybe, even if you talked about the Maxi, and even if Milan is still a very important city, there are really important and very significant things going on in peripheral places in Italy. And
certainly your context in Bolzano.
It's not only the context in Bolzano, it can be in Sicily, it can be in really small towns who are developing festivals, and to try to make out of these very special things something important. So it's we can make several examples of artists who really go into they study the food, they study really very local things and make art out of it. And since we have this cultural richness, and since we have all those differences, I think that we shouldn't have fear to make art out of this. And I think this is another a kind of positive thinking, and not only in Italy.
Yeah, and I think that the decentralization of the nation of Italy is a very interesting and fruitful context as well. And Alessandro, you work between Venice, Milan, and Rome frequently. But I guess for all of you, what is your relationship between your more permanent locales in Italy and other surrounding regions within the country?
Well, exactly. So there is a international recognized standard for exhibiting or consuming contemporary art, which we call the white box, the white cube, the white box. And then if we actually look at the way that most contemporary art is viewed and consumed and prepared in Italy, it's actually outside of that standard. So that's the first thing which makes it specific in particular. And the other thing, of course, is the delocalized nature of the country. So Italy is a medieval feudal society based in city-state. And so you find this it comes through in the people. And so you will find amazing galleries or small foundations throughout the fabric, the provinces in the most unexpected locations. An example is San Gimignano, a tiny town in Tuscany outside of Florence, where Galleria Continua has started in an abandoned theater in a medieval castle fortress. So it's scattered with these pockets of excellence, which come out of the initiative and creativeness of individuals, which breaks away a bit from the institutionalized norm of the archetype, museum archetype, as the one voice or the one place that then decides and promotes art and artists. And then this comes down to how it's consumed and communicated to the greater population, which is a separate conversation altogether. But it kind of gives an idea of what is happening in the country today. So instead of being localized in a major city like Paris or Chicago, it's spread out quite evenly across the different cities. So Maxi's in Rome. Milan has a lot of fantastic new exhibition spaces which are privately owned, like the Frana Foundation. But Turin is an amazing hub for contemporary art and not much spoken about outside of the art world context. Venice, we know, is an international platform. But then again, in Naples, there's wonderful collections and wonderful museums. So this, which is an apparent or possible weakness, actually becomes the way it survives. So the organism survives in a different way.
Yeah, and Diego and
Add one thing, because I think that Alessandro said a very important word, which is individualism, and individual also initiative. Maybe for those who are not so familiar with Italian contemporary art wouldn't exist if there wouldn't have been individuals like galleries, and we have an amazing scene of collectors who supported it. So now it's a bit against me, but this network of the Italian museums of contemporary art is really something recent. The institution have always been not on the first front, but always behind. Now we are trying to,
enliven them.
Yeah, exactly.
And Diego, I'm interested in your perspective as well as an artist. What role that plays in the larger field of contemporary art?
I agree completely with Letizia about this complexity in Italy, and what is so precious. This history is so rich and so full of very strong. Full of strong power and strong quality. But sometimes artists could suffer also of this huge, heavy, and so it's quite strong. And sometimes, so something bad begins when artists try to be at the same level of the history, and it could be dangerous because artists overvalue his own role of artist and getting frustration because is not able to maybe be at the same level, it's not. And this could be a problem. But in the other side, I mean, I remember when I was at the school, I was a student for a few years with Luciano Fabro. Luciano Fabro is, because I don't have a solution with this kind of problem, but he is an example of artist that can make in relation his contemporary art, I mean, contemporary role as an artist with the history of, in his case, especially of the 16th century, no? And this is a strong example, for example, I mean...
Yeah, and I know, Letizia, you've exhibited quite a few exhibitions with artists as curators. And Alessandro, your exhibition platform is more roving that have artists on projects throughout the city. What's your relationship between curator and artists from your perspective, and where are the lines within that?
Well, I think it's a moment where there's a lot of experimentation happening, and I'm speaking out of example where the Pino Foundation had Dan Bo curate the last show, so the artist was curator. We had an experiment in this year's Biennale when the Van Herent's collection from Belgium curated itself. So the collector is curator.
Right.
It's you know, I think it's important to explore and experiment, and then I think over time we'll see what actually works, what is meaningful, what has validity, what is necessary, and what isn't, and then we'll find that.
Letizia, what's your opinion on the role?
It's me who take the decision at the museum, so I have always been interested to invite artists as curators because I think they have a different eye. I invited them to work on our collection. So once I invited Massimo Bartolini and Stefano Arienti. Massimo Bartolini is also represented at the gallery of Diego, and I think he has an amazing sense also for space, and so effectively he created a kind of Wunderkammer out of our collection. And now I'm actually working with a kind of controversial figure on the Italian scene. The artist's name is Francesco Vezzoli. Francesco recently has started, not that recently, within the last years, really to work on our really ancient past, so that means also Roman sculpture that he revitalizes, also giving color to those Roman sculptures that he buys, and talking about polychrome marbles, because everybody maybe thinks that those sculptures have always been white, but they were not. And so I was interested to have his eye, because he's now so deeply interested in the past on my collection, on our collection. And we will open the show in January. I can tell you what comes out. He had the idea to frame our collection with important frames of masterpieces in Italian collections. So it's kind of weird conceptual work. So as you can see, as Diego said, the past is very often coming out. And I understand what Diego is saying, that sometimes it can be overwhelming for an artist, but again, for me, you should just say it's a richness, and I deeply believe in this contemporary scene, and sometimes I suffer when I come to this artist when only some generations, like Fabro, like the Transavanguardia, like the Art Cover, are well known, because we have so amazing artists in our contemporary scene.
And this is many of yours first time to Chicago. What are some of the differences that you've noticed so far in the past couple of days during your very brief stay here on the workings between Italy and here? What strikes you as immediately different?
Well, I mean, I guess you could compare two countries. So Chicago is a major metropolis in the United States. An American city in America, and it's the age-old debate of the public versus the private support of art and culture and contemporary art, and how just the facilitations, I'd say, which is just bureaucratic and legal to an extent, of patronage. So patronage is what ultimately pushes forward the contemporary art scene in the United States. As we said, in Italy, it's mostly through individual pushes and pullings of individual characters which invest themselves to bring to fruition and to the public certain projects. But it's a widespread appreciation and attitude towards support and donation and philanthropy. So it comes down to legality and
So for you, it's more of an institutional difference.
it's a systemic difference. Yes.
That's interesting. Letizia, do you feel the same?
Well, I completely agree. It's a fundamental difference, even if now we have a lot of hope for the Italian museums. As Alessandro said, what strikes you immediately here is this also patronage, the private investment in museums, in contemporary art. And this doesn't exist, but it couldn't even exist. Now we were talking, Stephanie, about Minister Franceschini, who's our Minister of Culture, now trying to make a kind of small revolution in our museums. Because before, we were talking about Maxi, but there is the National Gallery of Modern Art in Rome. It's an amazing place, the Galleria Nazionale d'Arte Moderna. But depending on the public hand, they were even not able to get private sponsoring because they couldn't. They were not allowed to. I think this sounds very incredible to this audience, I can imagine. So now they are really trying to get those museums autonomous so that they can finally be able to get some private money. It will be a long process because Italy is not used to this, and also there is a lot of bureaucracy. But now we have 20 new museum directors.
Which is an amazing feat that's happened all at once. For those of you who haven't heard of this, the director just assigned 20 new museums, not only for contemporary art, but for across the board. Cultural museums, mostly art museums with new directors to really revitalize the programming that they're doing there. And Diego, I'm interested too from an artist's perspective, when you're exhibiting in galleries in Italy versus your galleries in the US, is there any difference really for you, being an artist who's living and working currently in Italy?
No, I think not so much different. I mean, when I work to make my exhibition as excellent as possible. I'm not a special work for any place where I go. I mean, I prefer to stay on my own imaginary, vernacular imaginary or something like that. I mean, my work is my work. It's not for a special exhibition or for a special place in the world. Also because I think it's not time to think too much about geographic situation. It's much more better to think about sensibility. No? I mean, this is my opinion as an artist. But if you find some sensibility in a singular artist or in a singular artist, and you try to define this sensibility and try to make it readable, so you can make something very useful. For example, for an Italian artist to include them in international context, but it's not geographic. We are speaking about sensibility, which is quite different. It's not the powerful of the place. It's about a singular identity.
And I think that singularity definitely comes across in the exhibitions that you do in terms of conceptual consistency. Like you're saying, you don't necessarily react to the geography of the exhibition location, but it's more of your own personal practice. And I feel like that's the context of a lot of Italian artists working today. It's not necessarily branded as Italian as it used to be in modern times. It's more of an assimilation, a globalized context for a lot of the artists. So I think we have time for about one more question. So I'll end on a more prescriptive or speculative note. What direction do you see contemporary art moving in Italy, and do you foresee any major changes in the upcoming decade, being at the beginning of the 21st century as we are now?
Sure. Well, I think it's a bright new beginning, I guess we can say. So we have a very bright outlook ahead of us. I think something is shifted in the awareness, and for good or for bad, between the private intervention of many philanthropists like the Prada Foundation and the Trussardis and some big families who step forward to create spaces for the public to see art and host art. And with this new 20 newly appointed directors of museums, it's definitely a change from the old way in both the private and the public sector in which things have been managed. So only time will tell, but it's definitely interesting to keep an eye on.
Well, as I told you before, there is this association for the contemporary museums in Italy called AMACI. Once a year, the second Saturday of October, there is the Day of Contemporary Art in Italy, so all museums are open with special programs. And for the first time after 12 years that this association exists, we will have the press conference in Rome. The Minister of Culture will be present. I know for you maybe this is nothing so amazing, but for us
a huge achievement.
It's an important sign, because normally, as you told, the Minister of Culture is the ancient culture, and this minister will be with us talking about this Day of Contemporary Art. We hope that then he will also a little bit listen to us, because we have a lot of requests to him. I wouldn't have accepted the role as vice president, because there is a lot of work to do. We know also the museums have to be more connected, but our aim is really what you said before, and what also Diego wishes, that in our museums we put together international positions with Italian ones, so there shouldn't be a ghetto of Italian artists, and so showing them on the same platform, giving them the voice. And finally, my wish is that when I travel, when I'm abroad, and I may be seated next to a foreign collector, he doesn't ask me, or he or she again, what's going on the Italian contemporary art scene, because after Arte Povera there's nothing.
Right.
But this is our task, to really give voice and to support the new generations. But I'm confident.
I think it's all about the exchange, like you're saying. It's about visibility. And Diego, how about for you? You don't know. You stay in your studio.
I can't imagine so many changes. I think the real goal will be, the real how the new generation can be in relation with the contemporary art world, or in general also the globalized world, and so how they I don't know how they make what kind of surprise they try to try.
I think it has to, like you're saying, it has a lot to do with the
No,
type of work that they're making. And then
No, what kind of competition, of
Okay.
what kind of not competition they. And this is a question that could take care also, or of who work very isolated, and that what could change the generation, and then we follow a lot of things maybe. But first, I think the changes about generation have to be.
I think that's a great place to open it up to some questions from the audience. Leslie will be walking around, I think, with a microphone for you all, so if you can just wait 1 moment, I'll have you and then yes, this first one up here.
Is that a question over here? Thank you for sharing your experiences. I really appreciated, in a way, the resistance to a nationalistic narrative that came from you guys, and I was just wondering why this was chosen as a framing device for this panel, because in a way to talk about a very nationalistic narrative of contemporary art is, in my view, a little problematic. At Venice itself, there has been a long history of critique of this kind of exhibition making. We see now, for example, the German panel, that a pavilion that you don't have German artists necessarily, for example. This is just one among many examples. So I'm just curious, why is this a way to talk about contemporary art, to just frame it in a very national narrative? And if any of you see that as well.
Sure, I can speak from my perspective as a moderator first, and then I'll open it up. But I think that's the precise type of narrative that we're trying to redefine with a panel such as this, which is what are the national contexts in a globalized world. I think what we've all come to the agreement on is that it doesn't really exist. It exists as a network, as a decentralized network, and more as a constellation. Many of the exhibitions that we spoke of are international artists showing in Italy, and I think we're really using this, the example of Italy, which has such a rich cultural history and a history of this narrative, especially being a year in the Venice Biennale. 2015 is a good moment to have this and to sort of reimagine ways that we can frame national contexts before we move forward.
I got the impression that it was very driven by nationalistic, or maybe that was the impression that I was left with. But anyway, thank you, Hans.
Does anybody else have an opinion on that?
Well, Alessandro was talking about the Venice Biennial. Every 2 years, the questions arises again. There are all the national pavilions at the Venice Biennial. Does it make sense anymore? And I believe that it does make sense. But as you may have understood, I also like to provoke in the sense there is this globalized scene, and Diego as an artist says, I want to make my work well. It doesn't, if I'm Italian or if I'm, but at the same time, if I travel, I like to discover the roots, and I think that there is something that distinguishes artists that come from different countries. But again, not in a nationalistic sense, but they have something. They grew up somewhere. They had something. There was something in the air, and I like to discover this. It doesn't mean that you have to be nationalist, but this gives the specificity to an artist, and I think also that makes them the difference, and contrapose this to a fact that then otherwise everything would be the same. I don't know if I answered your question.
I think rather than nationalists, we're talking about a nation and a country is defined by a set of rules and a culture. So nationalist is different. If you're operating in Italy, it's different than operating in Germany, different than operating in England or in the United States. So I think this was more the purpose of the panel and what it's like to operate in a country which has a 3,000-year-old history and making contemporary art today. And you can be a German artist, wherever you come from, and you work in Italy, you will be subject to those same conditions of work and you'll be faced with these same conditions and these same challenges. So it has nothing to do, then we speak about Italian artists. And so obviously if you grow up speaking Italian and eating certain things and going to school and just, it'll be, your upbringing will define the work you make, inevitably. So it's not really a question of being nationalist, but about speaking a certain geographic perimeter within which people live and work.
Was there another question? Yes. Okay.
Thank you. Letizia spoke a couple of minutes ago about the lack of connection between Italian museums. So this may bring us to the question why Italian contemporary art is hardly visible internationally. Because if you just look at international biennials, important international exhibitions, publications like Fire, fashion, whatever, the presence is really, really tiny. Well, not only of Italian art, but also Spanish art, whatever it is. So maybe you can comment a little bit on what you think are the problematic parts of it, or what we could do much better to gain more access to those international narratives. Thank you.
I think it's defined by the, possibly on my view, I mean, I don't have such an extensive experience, but just in my brief view, I think the presence on the international scene is defined by the volume and the amount of artists being produced and the amount of work these artists produce. And that's directly related to, unfortunately, to the market. And that's directly related in some ways to the size of the actual Italian internal market of consumption for art, which fuels the production. So I think it's kind of, it's a system. And so if you're an artist, Italian artist, you don't have a market in Italy, you have to go to Berlin. And then, you know, it just shifts the, I think maybe that's in some way related to this presence.
I would say again, there is, I think also we as museum directors are guilty in a certain sense, and this word individuality comes out again. Our meetings sometimes are awful when we have to decide which artist has to represent, or because when we do this Day of Contemporary Art on the second Saturday of October, there is one artist who creates an image. You can imagine what fights during those meetings. And individuality is nice, but at the same time, what we never did is to say, this is the artist we want to be the young Italian artist, well known internationally. Other nations or our, let's say, countries do this. Even if they don't like this artist, they say, this is our horse, and let's go for it. And I know it is, I fight also with my colleagues sometimes, but excellent artists like Diego, like Roberto Quaggi, I mean, you have all the curriculum to be at the same level with other artists. I make the example of Wade Guyton since I'm here in America. I mean, a lot of people decided, even if I think he's an excellent artist, that he should be the young artist to buy. And this doesn't happen in Italy. It will also never happen, like Alessandro said, we have a different market, we have a different system. But when I'm talking about a network between the museums, we need also to do this. We also need to say, now we will show together these artists, even if one director says, I don't like them at all. So, sorry, it's a little bit simplifying answer. But
is there another question right here?
Thank you, first of all, for talk here today. We have a couple of things I would like to ask. I would like to ask Dio Perrone to perhaps address some of the work that we saw on the slides. And secondly, for Letizia, I think you had a very powerful tastemaker in Italy with Panza di Duomo. And with that came an influx of really conceptual art in Italy. And I know that Bolzano really supported that because we had one of my friends talk and do a discussion. And like I've never seen him do a discussion in Berlin, for example, or Düsseldorf. And so I'm very curious about those things. I'd like to hear about your work, but I'd also like to hear from you what the continuing philosophy will be. Will you continue in your conceptual model that was sort of set by tastemakers, or do you foresee a whole new arena opening up for Italian artists?
Question of okay.
Well, translation on it.
Um, yeah, you are speaking about the image on the screen, no? That was a show of Casey Kaplan that I explained before, and also the show of MUSEION invited by Letizia. Was was a glass sculpture. Usually, it's my ongoing series also now, and usually are profile of a face, and sometimes add a tattoo of koi fish or other subject. And this technique is called glass casting, and it's quite heavy to do because this sculpture is quite big to be in glass. And the process is exactly the same one that you use to make a bronze sculpture. So first you have to make a model of wax, and then you liquefy wax and put in the oven and transform in glass. This sculpture have to stay in the oven more than 1 week because are very because there is a lot of glass together, and this is to getting cold is very long the process. And at the end, as you have seen, what the result is a sort of mineral, a sort of transparent stone, much more like a texture. No, it's not a normal texture about glass, or it's completely different, like a piece of design. This one is much more like a natural, and then I use different color mixed together, and sometimes I use also matte and sometimes transparent. And when I mix together this, this is the effect that is more pictoric than sculpture, than as a sculpture, no? Because you can see inside how mixed the color is, like the material you can watch, you can see inside the material, and that's what I like of the glass. Yeah.
I'm very happy that you know our region, but unfortunately, the museum you are talking about is the Mart, which is located, let's say, 70 kilometers southern of Bolzano. It is the Museum of Modern Art of Trento and Rovereto, where effectively Giuseppe Panza di Biumo in the past has showed his collection, and also when he died, the family decided to leave their part of the collection on long-term loan. But this is also an important issue for Italian museums. First, a journalist asked me, "Are you here and also to collect something for your museum?" And I said, "Unfortunately, I can't. We have really a little acquisition budget, and therefore a lot of Italian museums work with Italian collectors and have their collection on long-term loan. The Mart was one of the first museums who did it and had a lot of support, also because of the brilliant director Gabriella Belli, who now is director of the Musei Civici di Venezia. And talking about individualism again, now Panza di Biumo family has withdrawn the collection from the Mart and is showing it in Venice. So as you see, very often in our country things happen because there are individuals work. So I can tell you, if the Mart has now again a new director, if this conceptual direction will, let's say, continue. But it's true that there are those strong collector families who believe in somebody and they go on together.
I think that that's a pretty good place to stop. Thank you all so much for coming to today's panel. We hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.